Thank you for joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
And you're listening to Diesel Performance Podcast. Guys, we got a couple of really cool episodes coming at you over the next couple of weeks. So, Chris, why don't you give them a little rundown of why are we doing this listener ride review push right now?
Man, because COVID-19 has a bunch of people shacked up in their houses not doing a damn thing.
Truth. Yeah, man. So everybody, we got a lot of guys at home, a lot of listeners at home, and we kind of wanted to give our listeners something to listen to, right? We thought, hey, we can't do a lot to help, but what we could do is we could make more shows so that people have just another place to have some fun and talk about stuff that we still care about. So we're doing listener rides just like back in the old days, man.
Well, I think, Paul, kudos to you, man. You've been taking the initiative here. I haven't been able to get on many of these. My job description's a little different than yours over at the shop. And, who would have thought working from home, we would be busier or I would be busier in my day-to-day stuff than what I would have been working a normal work schedule. But, you put a lot of time into all these, interviews and whatnot, getting the guys and, making sure the outlines are on point. So I appreciate you having me on just for the intros alone. So
please, so much fun to have you here, Chris. And I know a lot of our listeners who I've had on, so many Cummins, by the way. A lot of the guys still end up talking to you even after the show. So, hey, if you're a listener and you want to get on the show, jump onto the Fans of Diesel Performance Podcast Facebook group. Just request to join that and I'll automatically approve you. Get in there and we link up. You can actually go and sign up to be on the show. You could be a part of the show. I do have a heads up. This will be our first episode. This will go live this week, Chris. So we're recording this Monday, April 13th at night. So this will probably go up tomorrow. I will be rescheduling some of your guys' interviews if you are scheduled for next week. I'm going to be out of the office. My wife having a baby. So we will not be doing interviews while I have a less than 1 week old at home. We'll resume the last week of April. So we'll kick back up then once we can kind of get our handle back onto things. But we're excited for that. So that's coming. Before we dive into today's listener ride review, Chris, I wanted you to talk a little bit about EcoBoost tuning.
Yeah, so the EcoBoost platform has been something that the guys ourselves over at Calibrated Power have seen a lot of value in. The EcoBoost platform covers an array of years, so 2011 through 2020 is what we're covering so far. And every generation, there's a lot more gains to be had. So everything's done off of the EasyLink platform. So you have this really cool cell phone interface for flashing tunes. You have engine and trans support. There's flex fuel support. We're wrapping up some E85 specific tuning with some injector and injector pump upgrades, which surprisingly compared to the diesel stuff, it's like pennies on the dollar. So it's really crazy to talk about, the amount of injectors and a pump and, you're still looking at 3-digit dollar signs, not 4 and 5-digit dollar signs. So it's pretty cool to see that, but just the evolution of the product and, power gains that are similar to the turbo diesel power gains that we're used to seeing in our space in our industry. So really solid platform, a lot of improvements to be had. It's amazing to me though, Paul, how many customers that we've dealt with so far on this were already once a customer of ours in the Duramax or Cummins space. They owned a diesel and then they saw that they didn't need a 3/4 ton or 1 ton, so they go to the 1/2 ton twin turbo EcoBoost platform. So there's a really cool crossover there. So yeah, that's some of the fun stuff we've been doing over there over at Calibrated. So
yeah, man, 520 horsepower. It is not one. It's 520 horsepower with a much lighter truck, so your vehicle legitimately feels much faster. But 2, the dollar per horsepower to get to that 520 number, like you said, it feels like nothing in comparison to diesel. They have been a lot of fun. Twin turbo V6 direct injection. If you've been on the fence about an EcoBoost for your wife or for a second vehicle, hard to say no. I get it, man. And with a tune, it is a night and day difference, just like we're used to on our side of the fence. Speaking of some of the things that maybe have been around for a while, but now we're really starting to talk about a lot more. LB7 VCO injectors. So we did an awesome episode, Chris, you and
Man,
I diving into those, the VCO versus
yep.
SAC. What's the difference? Like LB7, we did a whole LB7 injector history episode. Diamond-like coating, DLC ball seats for the VCO injectors, really probably the biggest improvement that's ever been made to LB7 injectors.
Yeah, no, there's definitely an improvement there. Exergy was very open with, they've been working on that platform for several years, leading up to, the injector that we can offer now to the general public. It's one of those things where getting guys now, since these injectors have been out for some time, going back to guys back in 2016, 2017 that have had those injectors from, Exergy's inception to offering it, and seeing that they're living a long, healthy life. Makes a lot of sense. So getting that education to the general public, the industry itself, to know that, hey, this is a good injector, comes at an affordable cost, and it has some newer-ish style technology on an old platform. So it's always cool to see that.
For today, I did just want to give a shout out WC Fab and that L5P intake. We've talked about it on the show before. If you just have a really cool fabricated intake, jump onto WC Fab's Facebook page, jump onto their website, check out that L5P intake. We'll be more about powder coating and all of the specific upgrades that go along with it. For today, Chris, why don't we kick it over to an interview I did with Brent Leeuwen. Rough on that pronunciation. I'm sure I'll get it right in the interview. Any last notes or any last final thoughts for our listeners today, Chris?
Man, the WC Fab, their intake, they just published a color of a high flow bundle kit, if you will. And they had this blueberry frost. And I know we've talked about this before, Paul. I'm really big with the frost colors.
Blueberry
it really
frost.
cleans
It
up those
sounds like
engine bays
something I
really
would order
nicely.
at Baskin Robbins. I love it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, all right, guys, let's get over to the interview I did with Brent. Take it away, Paul and Brent. All right, guys, it's time for my new favorite part of our show, which is our listener ride review. Today, we have on a special guest, Brent Van Leeuwen. Brent, how the hell are you?
We're doing pretty good if we can stay warm today. It's a balmy 10 degrees outside, so we're hitting it pretty hard.
Oh, my back just shudders when I think about that. Whereabouts are you in the country?
Way upper northwest corner of Iowa. So yesterday, we got kind of blasted with a blizzard. So here we sit recovering from that. Pretty awesome for April, but welcome to Iowa.
Better you than me, I always say. I know how that weather can really kind of drive us inside, but we were talking a little bit before the show. You generally work outside. You're around tractors a lot, and I'm sure that's going to play into my next question here, which is, how did you start in diesel performance?
So back in high school, one of my classmates had a 99 Dodge regular cab with the biggest mod of all back in high school. Was basically a straight pipe. Had a lot of fun with that truck riding around. We carpooled to the community college that I went to, and yeah, just had a lot of fun around it. And then I started working for my local John Deere dealer, and basically the rest is history. Just started working on diesels and love everything about diesel, and always told myself one day I was going to own one. And then I found that 2006 that I have now, Dodge, and yeah, bought it up and started playing from there.
Yeah, let's dive in. This is one of the longest mod lists I've ever seen, listeners. Brent has done a thing or two to this truck. Run us through. It's an 06 Cummins. What do you have done to it so far?
So I bought it with 109,000 miles on it back in 2009, and it was about as bone stock as it gets. Pretty confident there was even some stock parts that weren't on there anymore. It was that stock. Started just adding some basic intake exhaust. Did throw a tuner on it, a Bank 6 gun, just to play around a little bit with it. And then over the course of a few years, ran it a bunch, used it for some mild towing, didn't really do a whole lot of super heavy or any competition things with it, but got to the point where my tranny started slipping real bad, which 48RE, what else is new? And so then I just started kind of pricing in, is it better just to dump it after I pay it off? Is it better to start playing with it? And then, penciling everything out, it started playing. So I basically started from scratch, had the tranny gone through, got an ATS Stage 4 transmission put in over in Colorado, Actually made kind of call it a man trip out of it. I took a couple of my buddies over there for a few days, and we just went and saw the sites while they worked on my pickup. So that was a lot of
Beautiful
fun
area.
too.
Yeah.
And then that was basically a year ago. Oh, a gorgeous area, gorgeous. Basically, that was a year ago today almost that we started that, and then I started ordering parts over the winter, and I've got everything just about wrapped up on it. Right now, I've got a set of 25% over injectors from Industrial Injection, 33% over CP3, just to kind of support that. An S364 turbo from BD Diesel, exhaust manifold from BD Diesel, 4-inch dual exhaust. I've got a Banks ram air intake manifold in there. I've also got their Technicooler intercooler system, stage 2 water methanol, heavy duty push rods, 103-pound valve springs. Kind of, if you want to say I went with everything needed to support, call it that 650, 700 horsepower range.
Yeah, I'd say you got a really solid shot at 650, 700 horsepower. Okay, I caught something here, and I just want to make sure our listeners are following along. So you got the truck in 2009, but you didn't build the trans until 2019?
Correct. So, like I said, I'm one of those typical people that doesn't need a diesel. I just wanted it and wanted to have it. So, like I said, it got a little bit of towing behind it, some equipment I'd haul around from my work to my house, whatever, as I'm doing some work on our acreage. And actually, what the icing on the cake was, I went and rescued my buddy who has a 2007 Dodge with a Cummins that got into an accident, and he couldn't drive it home. So then I grabbed his trailer and went and rescued him. And dragging him home is when I started, if you want to call it, ending the life of the transmission. So that's when everything started slipping real hard, and then from there it just kind of slowly went downhill. So then it was at that point I babied everything along as I could, but it got to the point I needed to start fixing or get rid of it. And fixing was a lot more fun than paying on another payment of a new pickup. So
that story reminds me of some advice my dad gave me, which was a friend in need is somebody else's problem. Anyway. But here you go, and you made it. I like that. It spurred something good. Something good came out of it.
So the hardest part was kind of picking a horsepower range, and then figuring out everything I needed to support it. Because, I know enough about them that you can have too much turbo for your fuel. You can have too much fuel for your air. So I went the roundabout way of kind of picking a turbo that I wanted. I know bigger singles are usually harder to spool, a little bit harder to go offline, that kind of thing, but twins wasn't quite in the budget at that point, which I say the word budget loosely because we had a budget once and then that got thrown away a couple times, but it got to the point where I basically, here's my turbo, here's what I'm after, what do I got to support with it? And that's where I kind of just started calling around to the different shops. The guys at Industrial were super helpful, picking out everything I needed. This could work, but this is going to work better for you. So play around with it that way. And like I said, it just kind of went from one thing to the next, and we kept adding on top of it. So
that's awesome, man. Which mod do you think made the biggest impact? What was like a night and day difference from installing it?
I'm going to be honest, it was the tranny. I realized going from a stock to a stage 4 was a huge jump, but that drive to Colorado and the drive home, holy shit. That was completely different pickup without having any other supporting mods on it besides a Banks exhaust, a cold air intake, and a tuner. But just the firmness of the shifts, and, you can lock in your overdrive whenever you want to. It was just right then and there a totally different truck. So once I started throwing everything else on, it was like 2 weeks ago, I finally got it running for the first time, and then drove it around a bunch. Had a couple wiring issues I had to work around because my torque converter clutch was locked on, so I basically would start in third gear everywhere I went.
Ooh.
So first time I test drove it, it was kind of like, God, this is kind of a doggy piece of shit. I don't know what I did wrong here, but a little bit of diagnostics I figured out when I moved my ECM out of the way to do a couple of work on that side of the motor. I knocked a couple of the wires loose that the transmission controller ties into. So once I got that fixed, everything kind of woke up from there. And yeah, it's, without even having tuning or anything on it yet, it really throws it back in your seat in a way.
Love that. Hey, I know anytime I've talked to somebody doing a build, they get down to the end of it, or they get down to this point where it's back on the road, and they look back and they kind of say, you know what, man, that transmission, it was the best thing I bought for my truck. And then they always have something in the back of their head where they're like, this thing I bought was a total waste of money. What was your mistake you made when buying parts for this build?
Biggest mistake I'm gonna say would be I did jump down the rabbit hole of like a throttle sensitivity booster. I thought, okay, that's gonna help keep everything up to snuff in there, and then I was like, we can tune around this, so I really didn't need it. But the advantage I have there is I have another place that can go, so I can get rid of it pretty easily. But it was just kind of buying the part before I did all the research on it and realized that it was going to be a waste of time. But otherwise, I honestly can't say I had too much. I don't want to sound boastful at all, but I don't say I had too much that I didn't appreciate or thought, this was a hunk of junk. I should have never bought it. Everything kind of wraps around itself.
Usually that's because somebody like you does a lot of education. You spend a lot of time learning about what parts are going to match up with what. You've already mentioned a few places, a few shops you called to kind of learn more. Where are some of the places that you go to learn more besides the podcast? Where else do you learn about diesel performance?
A lot of it is just on like factory direct websites. You can learn a lot just going on industrial injection and punching up different things on their injectors or their pumps. Forums are huge. I spend a lot of time on Cummins forum. Taking into account, you can have some haters on there, some guys that, they can preach one thing and say another and have two different things, but even just different Facebook groups. I mean, it's crazy what social media has turned into, but what kind of help it can actually do.
That's such a true statement. I mean, we all know that there's a lot of bullshit out there, but I think most reasonably intelligent people can sift through it to find the parts that are helpful. I know I've spent more time than I'd ever care to admit on forums and Facebook groups just trying to look for simple answers, but sometimes taking that time to read through all those articles really give you a much wider perspective about or for when it comes time to actually work on your own truck. I know personally, anytime I've been out working on a truck, there's always somebody who's jumped in and really kind of helped me out. Who's helped you out during your build?
I have had like I said, I had a few conversations like with the guys over at Industrial trying to make sure I had everything figured out. And, like I said, I wasn't going to have too much air for the fuel or vice versa. I did have a couple buddies come over. Also, I'm going to call them diesel enthusiasts that came over to help out. But like I say, a lot of it, I know where to kind of draw the line. That's where my transmission went over to ATS. Not going to say I couldn't rebuild it, but it was out of my comfort zone. And throwing 700 horsepower at something I kind of wanted to hold up. I know a diesel motor pretty well, so I was comfortable with tearing into that part of it, but it got to the point where I know when enough is enough, and I got to pay somebody that knows what the hell they're doing to do it the right way. But like I said, otherwise it was just a lot of late nights doing homework, research, going online, just typing in different things, and like you say, sifting through it, but looking for more than one answer. Don't just take the first answer you find of a question and run with it. You got to look for the same issue or problem or factor and see what 4, 5, 6 other people had to say about it and kind of rule it out that way.
I like it. Good stuff. Well, hey, I know one of the questions you had was you'd like to talk a little bit more about EFI live tuning in general, kind of how it works, and how do we change the tunes based on what parts you have. So I thought I would address this. I thought this would be a good time to kind of dive in. So you've mentioned your Bank 6-gun, one of the better box programmers on the market. I got no problems with that. It's better than stock. But with the technology out there today, it's a little bit dated on how it works. So with EFI live tuning, MM3 tuning, EasyLink, any custom tuning platform, what we're doing is we're doing a lot like what the factory did, and that's we're actually programming the ECU with different parameters in order to get different results, right? I guess it's like the simplest way I could put it, which I think just about everybody has kind of a basic understanding of. For example, like to give like a specific, like your truck from the factory in 06, dynos, will we say at 300 horsepower? It's probably right around there. Some give and take on that. 300 horsepower for the factory. But I know if I go into the actual engine computer and tell it to push more fuel and more air, that I can get it to make more horsepower. So why doesn't the factory just do that from the start? Well, the factory has to be willing to cover the warranty on this truck for anybody who could be financed. Not anybody who needs the truck, not anybody who knows diesel, not anybody who knows something about towing, not anybody who passes a certain IQ. test. Like, it's anybody who can finance the truck. So they have to dial these trucks way back from the factory. That gives them a lot of overhead. It also creates that opportunity for enthusiasts like you and I to go in and say, well, I know how to use my truck. I know when I need more power and when I don't. Let's access some of that. So it's literally, it's rewriting the engine computer to get more fuel out of it. With that is also involved reading and flashing, which are big parts of custom tuning. For your truck, we generally don't need to read out the stock file, although it's not really a bad idea. So if you have an EFI Live programmer, you should be able to read out that 5.9 stock ECM file. And then you literally, the flashing process just writes over what's in the engine computer. Most cases, it probably doesn't rewrite everything. It rewrites the main operating system. So like a full flash would be a full operating system flash. In those files, tuners are adjusting, depending on the truck and the tuner, they're adjusting 50, 100, 150 different actual engine parameters. And that's what builds up an actual custom tune. I hope that explains it. Are there any parts that like are a little bit fuzzy, or you've heard somebody explain it, but you'd like to talk a little bit more about it?
No, that does make perfect sense. It does clear up a lot. It was just more of, like I said, take the parts that I have, my 25% over injectors, my 33% pump, the transmission platform that I have set up, and what deciphers that different from a guy that, say, only put, I think 30% over is the next size down injector, or 13% over injector, just a smaller platform. How do you change from that smaller platform to a little bit bigger, to a little bit bigger, to a little bit bigger?
A lot of it has to do with testing. So let's hone in on an example, and then we'll talk about kind of the broader picture here, right? So I like the example of just injectors, because the difference in a tuning calibration from 25% and 30%, it really depends on what you want to get out of that tune. If you're just looking for peak power, you could probably run the exact same tune file on a set of 30% as you could on a 25%. In fact, I know you could. So you could just max out, like, here's the maximum pulse width. So the maximum amount the injector is allowed to spray before that injector starts actually dropping oil pressure, before it actually drains the rail faster than your pump can keep up with it, right? So it'll run the same, but those 25% injectors at idle are going to haze a little bit more. They're going to have more heat when they're just operating normally. They're going to be smoky when you're out on the road and you're really getting on it. So while that same calibration could run either set of injectors, because they're so close of 25 to 30%, refinement, good custom tuners are going to go in and refine it just a little bit more, so that, yeah, you still get that peak power, but we can get rid of the haze, we can get rid of the smoke, we can minimize the heat. And that's what a lot of your injector tuning is all about, is you don't want injector rattle, gotcha. You don't want haze, you don't want smoke, you do want peak power. Where do we find that balance? Now that same concept can be applied to all of the aspects of tuning, right? So we go into each individual piece, like say your CP3 pump. In this, we might work that FCA a little bit differently, right? Your fuel control actuator, we might work the control on that a little bit differently depending on how big of a pump you're running. So an industrial 33 compared to like an Exergy 12 mil, those are going to require different calibrations on that specific component. But then again, a good custom tuner is also going to look at what's the relationship with all of your other parts, right? Things that I think guys get stuck on is, like, when I look at your list of mods here, there's no tune adjustment for a Banks ram air intake, a 4-inch exhaust, an exhaust manifold, an intercooler, an intake horn, an intake plate, a lift pump, fuel distribution block, valve springs, fuel inlet tubes, push rods, coolant bypass, coolant filter, studs, even water meth. There are no tune adjustments for any of those modifications. Maybe like you have to turn an exhaust code off or something, but you don't actually change anything in the tune when somebody does any of those parts to their truck. What you're going to change in the tune is the stuff we can control electronically. You know a lot about diesel engines, and you've torn them apart, so you know where all these wires go. So like my general rule of thumb for somebody maybe newer to the industry than you is, if you see electronic wires running to it, we can probably control it one way or the other.
More or less the the hard parts, you're not.
But like
playing
airflow,
with.
like I
It's
get
your
got
electronics and making those
go,
hard parts work with the rest of your platform is what you're doing.
yeah. So an engine computer doesn't monitor or care about the size of your intake. The only reason it would is because of your mass airflow sensor. So as long as we have a strictly scaled mass airflow sensor, there's nothing else to do with the intake. Your engine computer doesn't care how big your intercooler pipes are. Doesn't give a shit. There's no monitors there. There's no tune adjustment there. There's nothing to do. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't do those mods? Of course not, right? Like you're going to get lower GTs if you run bigger intercooler pipes or a bigger intercooler. Like you should do that. That's a good idea. But there's nothing in the tune to make the truck run differently based on what size intercooler or intercooler pipes you have. You know what I mean? Now those mods went now as a tuner working at a tuning because I do not write tunes. Make that very clear. Because it's so cool, but it's so nerdy, dude. There's just it's much smarter than I could ever be.
That's exactly where I said earlier. Pay the people that know what the hell they're doing.
That's right, man. Now when the guys are building a tune, they see that you have 103-pound valve springs and heavy duty push rods and a fleece coolant bypass. They're like, okay, well this guy's race tune, he probably wants it all because he can handle it. Whereas if you call in and you got an S364 and all stock for all of those other parts, so if you only upgraded your turbo, your injectors, and your CP3, technically your truck is capable of making the same power, but I wouldn't recommend it. If you were to call in and ask for the extra sauce on your tune, that would be a lot less extra sauce I would throw on that truck than I would to yours. You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly. Gotcha.
So that's really it's tuning in general is just kind of a basic concept, right? Tuning is just basically changing how the computer tells stuff to work. But that fine tuning, that like custom tuning, those are things that take revisions. Like when we have a customer do a build in house, usually the tuners will grab the truck for a whole day. So they go out and they spend 8 hours with the truck. They drive it around on the street. They tune it in the parking lot. They drive to lunch. They tune in the parking lot. They come back. They put it on the dyno. They tune it on the dyno. They go out. They drive it on the street again. They tune it again. There's no one perfect tune to say like, oh, okay, you have these mods. Everybody gets this exact same file. To some extent, yeah, that works. But then we also know that as you start to get a bigger and bigger list of mods, it probably also means you know your truck better and better, and you know what you want from it. And when people know that, it makes it easier for your tuner to kind of dial in and be able to give it to you. You know, it's like I tell my toddler, cry all you want. If you don't tell me what you want, I can't fucking give it to you. And that's what it comes down to with customers, you know. And I tell guys, like it looks like on your parts list here, it looks like you've been on a mad rush over the last year putting parts on the truck, and I love that. But we also expect when we're talking to a guy like you to have spent this last year also thinking about, I do wish my spool up was quicker. I do tow a lot with the truck. I don't ever tow with anything, so I don't give a shit about a tow tune. I just want all the power. You know what I mean? Like, as you're having fun in the truck, we ask our customers anyways here, think about it. You know, think about what do you like? Think about what don't you like, you know?
Yep, exactly. And I actually did take my Bank 6 gun off, and I ended up getting an Edge CTS2 just for the monitor capability. Because, yeah, my next step down the line, once I get the rest of it done, is to get some actual tuning done versus just saying, okay, yeah, I got all these parts, I got a Bank 6 gun, let's turn it up to 5 and hammer down. Because I just know that doesn't work. I mean, that works for the high school kid that wants to blow black smoke at everybody who wants to see. But I grew out of that phase, thank God, and I just want clean, reliable power at this point. So
I love it. Yeah, no, I mean, dude, you got a great build. I think you're on the perfect setup to get what you want out of the truck. I think this will be a home run for you. I do think you're right, tying it all together with that custom tuning to make sure that we are pulling those injectors back and that pump back a little bit when we're cruising around in town or we're sitting at idle. Right now it's running stock calibration. So just think and I'm not like poking, but if any company tells you this is 33% over pump and these are 25% over injectors, that means that on a stock calibration, you're sending a minimum of 25% more fuel into every single combustion event.
Which is more than what it needs for what it's actually doing.
It's 25% more than what it needs. Right? So that's where I try to remind guys, like, you got this great this great build put together. You got good gauges on it. You got everything you could to keep this truck reliable, which is really what a lot of these modifications scream to me is you're not a guy who's out drag racing every weekend. You're a guy who wants the truck to run forever. Yeah, I think you're right. I think tie it together with some custom tuning and it'll be a home run. Yeah, well, sure.
It'd still be able to play. Yep, that's kind of my next step is get everything else to play nice together, and hopefully, like you say, longevity is going to be the big kicker. Because, like I said, it was basically a debate of build this like I always said I was going to, 10 years ago when I bought it, or dump it and let's get something new that I don't need to mess with. But where's the fun in that when I know where this truck has been, when I know what it's been through, where I know what it did? The owner before me pulled a camper to and from Texas with it in the wintertime. So very rarely did it see a mountain of snow, slush, ice, and it drug a camper around. And I know they weren't hard on it. It was an older retired couple. So I wasn't concerned at that point.
Shit, it was barely broken when you got it.
Cummins,
yeah.
Let's face it. They're made to last besides the transmission. So it was to the point where, I just wanted... I know, right? It was just something that I've always wanted to do, and I had that opportunity to do it. So I convinced the wife of, like I say, quote unquote budget, and away we went. And then she saw the budget at the end, and we won't dive down that rabbit hole. But I guarantee when she listens to this podcast, she's gonna glare at me a couple times, but it's all good. The biggest advice I have, which is the advice that, I've heard you guys say on your podcast a bunch, is do your homework before you dive in and do anything else. It's one thing, like I said, right, wrong, or indifferent. I picked my turbo and blew everything up from there, but pick a starting point, pick where you want to be, and make sure you do all the supporting homework with it. Don't try and cheap out and, to support 700 horse, I should have these bigger push rods or heavier valve springs or anything like that. But I'm going to save money and not do it because I don't know about everybody else, but I only like to do shit once. I don't want to tear my whole motor apart, have to turn around and do it all again unless I'm putting more shit into it. But to do something twice where I was in there once already just doesn't trip my triggers. So do the homework. Don't be afraid to call these shops. I was a little bit scared with some of them that, it's little old me with my 600 horsepower build, but they treat you just like they do the guys that are wanting to throw down, 1,500, 2,000 horse on a drag truck or a sled puller. You're still a customer to them, and that's the biggest kicker there.
Well, I think that's great advice to end it on. Guys, for today, this has been Paul Wilson, and you just heard from Brent. Thank you so much for listening.
COVID-19 has a bunch of people shacked up in their houses not doing a damn thing.